looking at the latest UEFA figures, Simon. In terms of what clubs spend, Manchester United seldom out of the news. We'll get to the Dan Ashworth aspect of that in just a second, but have the latest UEFA figures, Simon, laid bare the task that lies before Sir Jim Ratcliffe. You often go to a football match and the crowd breaks into what a waste of money.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not going to name names as what a waste of money he was or he was. I'm just going to bring a few names into the equation here and you can make your own minds up. Manchester United's squad last year, it turns out, in terms of spending, was the most expensive ever assembled in football. Previous to it, Real Madrid held that title. In one season, they spent £1.13 billion. Manchester United for season 22-23, the squad that was assembled and the players that were brought in, Simon, £1.2 billion, 1.42 billion euros.
Yeah.
And then you begin to break it down. United's squad included Anthony, 82 million. Harry Maguire, 80 million. Jadon Sancho, 73. Casemiro, 70. And on it goes. I mean, does this lay bare the task that lies ahead for Sir Jim Ratcliffe? Off the back of spending like that, is there going to have to be a total rethink?
No, not really. I think it gives you the scale of the opportunity as well, because clearly Manchester United have had the capability to be able to spend that level of money without actually having any owner support to do it. So that's one thing. The fact that they've not spent it well. And I do think there's an element of recruitment for Man United takes a unique perspective on it. One is that everybody knows that Man United are in desperate need of rebuilding a team and a club, and so they get a premium tax on whatever they buy, albeit the Jadon Sancho transfer was mooted at 115 million the previous season, and when Dortmund sold him to Man United, it was 73 million.
Yeah. And
the other side of it is that there is something very different about playing for some of these other football clubs. I spoke to in a conversation with Paul Ince the other day about Liverpool and Man United and which club has the more expectations, given he's played for both. And he said Man United. Man United has more expectations than any club he's ever known. And so that means you have to have a unique brand of footballer to go in to play for that football club. Not just a good footballer, someone that has a psychological profile of understanding what it's like to play in an environment where we spend all our time focused on Man United dawn till dusk.
Yeah.
And the media do that, and the fans do that, and the interest in Man United globally is as big as any football club in the world, if not bigger. And then you look at the players that they've bought. Well, centre-backs cost 80 million quid. That's what they cost. Harry Maguire, at the time, was being sought after by various football clubs. I believe he turned down Manchester City to go to Manchester United. And so with that in mind, that was the price on the ticket. He's been there for 5 or 6 years. Whether we like his current vein of form or not is irrelevant. I'm assuming that Chelsea paid 70-odd million quid to Leicester for Fofana because they thought he was a centre-back. And Chelsea and Liverpool bought Virgil van Dijk. Virgil van Dijk's a better player than Harry Maguire, but that was the price on the ticket. You look at some of the other players,
Anthony, 82 mil.
Well, these are, again, the recruitment process and the reasons behind it and the intelligence and the due diligence will become more sophisticated because
it's got to, hasn't it?
Yes.
I mean, it doesn't even include Mason Mount, 55 million. But Onana, 47.
But when you think about it, Onana on the back of last year was rated one of the best goalkeepers in the world. Right? Whether he's hit the ground running at Manchester United any more than David De Gea did in his first season, when everybody said he can't catch crosses, and he then went on for a period of time to become a Man United stalwart. The bottom line is that goalkeepers cost 50 million quid now. Chelsea pays 70 million quid for Kepa. People pay 70 million pound for goalkeepers left, right and centre, seemingly now more regularly than they did before. So 47 million pound for a goalkeeper isn't a bad amount of money. Mason Mount, an international footballer. What do you buy a midfield player for? You pay 50 million pound for midfield players. That's what you do. Everton paid 50 million pound for Sigurdsson, didn't they? 5-6 years ago.
That's right.
So these are the prices.
45 million.
Yeah. You look at Rasmus Højlund, 72 million pound for centre forward. The boy's scoring goals now. The boy is beginning to look like a player that will score goals for United and is now beginning to find his feet. There's no argument about the badly spent money currently on 82 million pound on Anthony, currently on Jadon Sancho, and currently on Casemiro. Those are bad buys, and one of the bad buys, Casemiro at 70 million quid. Graham described him as a steady Eddie. And over the course of time, if you say things long enough, eventually you might get proved right, because there was a period of time when Casemiro was not a steady Eddie. He looked like a world beater for United, or certainly a good value for money. But there's been bad buys, and what this creates is an opportunity, because you can look at all of the failings, all of the shortcomings of a previous set of decision-making processes and use them as currency to suggest what you'll do differently and how you'll buy differently.
If you were Sir Jim coming in, would you do differently? If you've got Ashworth working for you, will you team up and do it differently?
Well, if you've got Ashworth working for you, you would ask Ashworth to tell you how you're going to do it differently, because you don't have a cook and make the broth yourself. You give him the directions, you tell him what you're expecting from him, and you give him the tools to go and deliver. And I would be looking at that squad of players and saying, right, okay, what needs to be changed? Who needs to be sold? What needs to be broken up? I'll have to take some medicine for some of the players that we bought that aren't clearly working for us, and maybe we have to get out of some of these deals that we've done. I mean, Harry Maguire, we're talking about transfer spend. We're not talking about financial fair play or losses as a result of it. We're talking about a squad that's been assembled. Yeah. And in the currency of that football club, it is a squad of players that were bought, I'm assuming, for reasons. The fact that managers haven't been able to exact outcomes from these players and the team hasn't been able to be built is as much a failing of the managers and the group of players as it is of the owners and the people that made the decisions to buy these players.
Your eyebrow isn't particularly raised at some of the amounts.
No, the amount...
This is where we're at in football.
But it's well established. I mean, Man United have been proven to be the biggest spenders. The argument about Manchester City and what they do and don't spend and what they are and what they aren't is a kind of moot argument, because Manchester City are a club that now trades, tends to spend a lot less than other football clubs in a similar position, although there's very few clubs in a similar position to Manchester City, because they trade players in a way out. And they don't spend the kind of money that Manchester United have spent. It's a fact. Man United have spent over the last decade more than anybody else. And the problem is they have spent it on players that have underperformed. And then you have to ask yourself, what are the lessons that you take from that? Why have these players underperformed? Because clearly you saw something. What was the thinking and what was the process that you followed to buy these players? Put aside the money. If these
it's
players,
hard to put aside the money.
No, it's not. The only reason this conversation is relevant is because the team aren't performing. The only time you ever start talking about what someone costs or what someone's paid is when they're not performing. The question should be not what you've paid for them. Why aren't they performing? That's the question, not how much you pay for them.
Then you look at the list with Newcastle, and is it any surprise that they're talking about Dan Ashworth? Because at Newcastle United, in came Alexander Isak, 63 million, albeit it's a sizable amount of money.
Yeah.
Anthony Gordon, 45. Yeah, a fair chunk of money. Harvey Barnes, 39. Tino Livramento, 36. Fen Botman, 35. So is it any wonder, and Nicky, the Newcastle fan, is saying, Jim, ask Simon, is it the fact that if Ashworth leaves Newcastle, he is the man that everybody wants in football because he knows what it's worth to get a club into a top 4 position?
Yes, because he does and he doesn't. He does because
he surely does, Simon.
Well, he does and he doesn't, because Newcastle tripped the light fantastic last season. They're not having it quite their own way this season.
Not true.
And we'll see how that looks. I mean, and being a director of football, albeit you have the Saudi field background, which give people the perspective that ultimately they've got as much money as they want to spend, right? But that's been laid to rest by the financial fair play marketplace, and they've played that card relatively well. It is we are going to find out unequivocally whether Dan Ashworth is all that he's cracked up to be at Manchester United, because it is one thing recruiting for Newcastle and one thing recruiting for Brighton. It is an entirely different mentality, an entirely different set of requirements and expectations and scrutiny recruiting for Manchester United.
Do you honestly still think that?
Massively.
Why?
Because everybody knows it is. Everybody knows that there's a certain type of player.
Newcastle's under the microscope constantly.
Not to the level of Manchester United. First of
So
all,
are Brighton,
the
so are
individual,
Villa.
the scrutiny of the fans. Let's start with the fans. Newcastle fans spent the first 18 months being grateful for anybody but Mike Ashley. And they got this wonderful feel-good factor because they got this bump. If you actually look behind it and look at who owns them, then perhaps you would question the validity of that thinking, but notwithstanding it, they've got an ownership which is not Mike Ashley. Eddie Howe came in, they got themselves out of the problems that they were in, and they bought some sensible players. You know, whether these players are going to catapult them to the next level and sustain them there, in the meantime, they've won nothing. Manchester United have won the League Cup, beating the aforementioned Newcastle to achieve that.
Yeah, having spent a fortune.
But that's what Manchester United do. But Manchester United spent a fortune that they can afford to spend. It doesn't put them in any jeopardy. Their wage bill is huge.
Are they going to end up spending money like they spent last time around?
Yes.
£1.21 billion
to assemble a squad
with Ashworth in alongside Ratcliffe.
Yeah,
that kind of money.
Yeah, listen, I would think that they would not want to. That's not a burning ambition of theirs. But there is a tax that gets applied to Manchester United. There is also a feeling that the intellectual capital that has bought these players has not joined up the dots properly. and not made their decisions considering the aspects, because clearly these players can play. Anthony can play. You don't pay £82 million for a player. People were raving about Jadon Sancho a couple of years ago. They haven't done it under the focus of Manchester United for a variety of reasons.
And the clock's ticking.
For a variety of reasons, right? Because A, they're not good enough, and B, they're not good enough in the environment that Man United engenders.
Okay.
Ashworth will prove the point that he's a top quality operator if he fixes the problem at Man United.
Okay.
I still think there's a lot of questions there.
Dan Ashworth, the man expected to be announced as the new chief exec of Manchester United. It would appear that's well down the road to happening. Liam Stourbridge, I like it. You look at United spending, you look at Villa's spending. The midfield costs $17.6 million. McGinn, Douglas Luiz, Tielemans, Kamara and Ramsey.
Look at the end of the season.
Not bad, though. Not bad.
Look at the end of the season, see what you got.
That was a roundup of football's top business stories with Tesco Mobile for Business.
Jim White and Simon Jordan. Monday to Friday mornings from 10. On AM, on DAB, via the TalkSPORT app and on your smart speaker. TalkSPORT.